Yeah, Sandy was 60, and she decided correctly that we'd both live longer
Yeah.
if we got out of the pressure.
I retired from UWW at 63, but then stayed 2 more years at UWW. When I retired, I was in the middle of setting up a sustainability program in UWW, working with John Gerber and some other people around the university who wanted to do that, and they were creating courses that were going through continuing ed, which would make it possible for UWW students to do a sustainability degree. So when that got set up, I'd been asked to develop a course for BDIC and teach it, and so I did that for 5 years. And then I finally left when I was 70. I really, for the first 3 years anyway, I really loved the BDIC work because I hadn't worked with young students for many, many years, and so it was really interesting, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And the classes were fairly small, 25 maximum, so we could have good discussions. The last 2 years, I noticed a very interesting change. That students were getting really anxious about getting degree, getting good grades, getting a good job afterward. There were very few BDIC students that I worked with who were going into the arts and sciences. Lots of them going into business, lots of them going into social sciences, sociology, psychology. An interesting contingent of people who were horse lovers came to the university to be in animal science, realized in the first semester or so that animal science was really basic training for veterinary school, and way too much science. What they wanted to do was do a horse business or train horses or teach. And so that's how they ended up at BDIC. They could create a degree that had some animal science courses, but also some business courses.
The English department and the humanities are on the brink of extinction because of what's going on in the larger university.
Right.
It's not the students, it's the university system.
And the economic system, because that's pretty much what I was seeing at BDIC.
Yeah.
Is that it was a response, I thought, to how the society is changing and what options there are for students in the humanities. And, in the sciences, there are lots of options if they want to really go into science. But I think it was probably 400 or something like that. It wasn't a big program, and they had very little financial support. Yeah, they were always hurting, and a lot of help from faculty who volunteered their time.
The whole thing premised upon the cooperation of faculty across campus.
Yeah. UWW used to have faculty sponsors for every student who came through and the program, and that began to change as the university began to change, and faculty had less and less time because all of the faculty sponsors were volunteers, and as the university began to change and faculty had less and less time, we had a harder and harder time finding faculty sponsors for students. And right around the time I retired, actually around the time we moved off campus, we started not having faculty sponsors. So today, UWW students don't have faculty sponsors unless they're doing something that's way outside, really different from what the university offers. Big difference. And we used to have, do you remember the prior learning conversation? Students would, get together with faculty sponsor and the advisor, and others maybe, family members or that kind of thing, and they'd talk about their portfolios. And it was wonderful. It was really a great, it was like the, gosh, what did you call them in IP?
Celebration evaluation.
Yes, that's right. That was, and these were wonderful things, and the faculty loved doing it. And then everybody got too busy, and departments were shorthanded, and faculty had more work, and so now, one of the things, I don't know if either of you know this, but this is some time ago, as an aid for students, as a way of helping students decide what kinds of areas of concentration they wanted to develop. We made a list of former areas of concentration. And it moved over time from, well, here's something to look at that might help you think about what you want to do. Here's a list, pick one. Pick an area of concentration, because we already had courses set up for various areas of concentration. And so the process of designing a degree, the process of working with a faculty sponsor began to erode over time.
In the old days, let's not talk about the good old days. They were different. I was teaching a humanities and arts mode of inquiry, and it was pretty traditional for what I've been doing for a few years. But the first thing we read, and I was really anxious about it, was a Shakespeare play. I can't tell you what one it was, I don't remember. And after we finished that, the students sent a delegate to me and said, can we abandon the syllabus and just study Shakespeare for a semester? And I say yes.
Wow.
Right? Because in a mode of inquiry, what we're after is the mode of inquiry. And you can read, historical primary documents, you can read literary primary documents, you can go to the theater, you can go to the art gallery, because the absolute particular course subject content is the means to a larger end, as opposed to taking a course, say, the Survey of American Lit, beginnings to the Civil War, so you answer questions like, did Moby Dick get published before the Scarlet Letter? Or to go back to our last talk, did you memorize the periodic table of elements for the test on Wednesday and pretend that you know something about chemistry? So yeah, we changed the course.
Yeah.
We couldn't do that in the late 80s.
In a regular department.
It was a new era.
Yeah.
One day I was wrestling with a problem about classical Greek philosophy, so I called up a colleague, and he took care of that real quick
Yeah.
because he knew what he was talking about.
Right.
And then we got to chatting, and he said, "You know, Johnstone, when I fell in love with philosophy and you fell in love with literature, we never thought about getting a job.
Right.
We were
Right.
going to do this because we loved it. The fact that we ended up getting a job is a gift.
Yeah.
And we really are freaks, right? We went to school
Lucky
in the
enough to stay that
kindergarten
way.
and we never left. And we got paid for the whole last 40 years of it. I pulled out of an old file the course handbook for IP
Uh-huh.
and the very last course syllabus for the program. And our last entering class was 1990.
1990. Wow.
And I don't have the course syllabi from all the way back to the 70s. But the last one that we had was so rigid, I couldn't believe we survived.
Wow.
It was just amazing. This article by the chair at Pace points out, quite rightly, that majors in English and history and other humanities and arts are gainfully employed in all kinds of areas,
Yeah.
not just pumping gas or selling cars. And she has some very interesting concrete examples. But the institution of higher education seems to be locked into this idea that a major is job training.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then the students are picking, because of that, because of how the university is restructured, students are really pressured to study something that's going to get them a good job. And
So they think.
whether that's really what happens or not is another story, but that's what they think when. And those last 2 years I taught at BDIC, students would come up, have a meeting with me, and they'd say, "What do I have to do to get an A? I need to get an A." And it kind of caught me off guard because I hadn't had that question before at UWW. It was just, how do I do a degree plan, or how do I do a portfolio? And it occurred to me that they're really under an enormous amount of pressure to be able to get a degree with a very good grade point average so they can go to graduate school if they need to, in an area that's going to bring them a decent income. Just in those 5 years that I was there, I noticed a big change. And it had to do with the kind of pressure that they were feeling from the university, but also from the society at large. Is that how do I fit? How do I take care of myself after I leave school? It was kind of scary. Well, it caught me off guard for one thing because I'm an old guy who came from UWW where we just didn't even talk about that stuff.
Well, I'll start with I never thought I was smart enough to go to college. And My parents both had college degrees and were very smart. Their being very smart was more important than college degrees. So I grew up with books. I grew up with conversations about unresolvable problems. In the 50s, liberal arts colleges were asking high school graduates to have either 4 years of one foreign language or 2 and 2, 2 years of 2 different foreign languages. I don't know if that was true in Utah, but it was really true in Massachusetts. And then after that, it was, have good grades in science, math, English, history. That was about it. So I made a deal with my parents that I would apply to one college, and if I got in, I'd go. And I picked a college that we could afford. I had started working very young, and so I was saving money, and they were saving money. And I got into it, and I went. And I rediscovered that I really liked learning. That's what I talked about last time. I fell in love with just learning things. And I transferred to a big urban university, so I would have a greater range of things to draw upon and learn from. And I think I said last time I went to graduate school by accident. I had no intention of getting a doctorate and teaching at a 4-year college. I thought I would teach at a community college, and I was. But I actually got, sounds more impressive than it is. I was actually asked to apply to a doctoral program. And so like I was in high school, I said, well, if they let me in, I'll go.
I joined the service right out of high school and went to basic training. And basic training was in 2 parts. The first was in Fort Ord, California. That was just basic infantry training. And then I went to medic training in Texas, Fort Sam Houston, Texas. I learned at some point that if I were accepted to a college, I could forego the last 2 months of basic training. And by then, I realized I wasn't going to stay in the Army any longer than I had to. so I applied to the university in my hometown, and they had a split session, so that they had a session that went half a semester, so I could actually enter halfway through the semester, which was what I would have to do in order to get accepted and then deal with the Army and get out of the last 2 months of basic training. And I had a friend that I'd gone into the service with, and he lived in the same town, and so we both applied. We both got in. The Army said okay, and we got on a plane and went home and went to school. and it was very interesting. I had some excellent teachers in that first semester, and I had, because of Mrs. Nelson, whom I talked about last time, I became an English major, and I loved reading the stuff. I didn't have too many good teachers. It was sort of, okay, we're going to do romantic literature, and here are the poems we're going to read, but I had a couple who were really quite good. In between, I took off about 6 months and went traveling in Europe, and that was a great educational experience. I learned so much about myself and about the world and about how small my world had been and how much larger it could be. I came back and decided I was going to go to graduate school because I thought I'll be a teacher. And I wanted to be a writer. And so I got accepted to graduate school in California and went out there. It wasn't long before I realized I didn't want to be an English professor. I didn't like the way the courses were taught. I didn't like the way that if you did Victorian literature, you did it unconnected from what came before and what came after. It was just, okay, we're going to read these Dickens novels, and then we're going to, and that wasn't the way my mind worked. I really kept seeing all these connections that we couldn't talk about in class because we were focused on a particular work that we were studying. And so I took my primary qualifying exams. I was in a master's to PhD program, and I passed, and then I left. And I said, all right, I'm going to go do other things, and wanted to travel, wanted to read more, wanted to write, wanted to do all this. So I did. I met my wife in Santa Barbara. I was in Los Angeles, and I had a friend who was a TA at UCSB, and his office mate was this wonderful woman whom I met when I went up to visit one time, and then she was getting her master's, and she got a scholarship to Germany. So we went to Germany and stayed there for 8 months, and then we had some friends who were starting a commune in Greece on the island of Paros. So we did that for a year or so, and then came back, and finally but when I got the job at UWW, I realized that I really wanted to get a doctorate, but I wanted to do it, I wanted to write about experiences that I'd had in the alternative school I had been director of. And so that's how I ended up going back to school and getting my EDD. So it's a twisted story. It took a long time.